Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a video about building your full stack mobile application with your backend being built in TanStack, and you're packaging it up to get it on mobile will be done with Capacitor. Capacitor is a cross-platform native runtime for web. Most people know it from Ionic Framework, but just to be clear, Ionic Framework is the UI piece in the front, and Capacitor is basically how you package it all up. You'll see in this example where we are not using Ionic Framework at all, but we're going to take a full stack application, the client side application that we will get from generating static page website using TanStack. That will be our front end, which will get packaged up Capacitor. Our back end will still be sitting on top of TanStack. So what's great about this approach is that you get all of the benefits of TanStack, the developer experience, the backend, the type safety, access to TanStack router, access to TanStack Start. You can set up API routes. And as you'll see in the video, hopefully eventually they'll fix the issue that we have with server functions. And also you get some of the functionality from React Query built all in it. So if you have not looked at TanStack and all of the different tools that it has available, I strongly encourage you to do that. Even if you don't go with this mobile approach that I'm about to show you, TanStack is awesome. Before we dig into the code, I just wanted to show you, this is the base TanStack Start application that we are going to have deployed on a mobile device by the end. You can see they're the same. I have my home page. I have my Start API request. The APIs work fine, as I mentioned, but the server function, as you can see, server function runs fine here on the web. I can add more. This is from the web. Adding to-dos work fine. Refresh, I can see them here, but they don't work on the mobile device, and this is what we're going to kind of cover a little bit deeper inside the video. There are a couple of tweaks that I had to do to get the app to run. This is the application that you get when you run TanStack Start, basically create app. It's a default application. What I've done is I have packaged it up into Capacitor. I'll walk you through the steps. Also, I have a whole blog post that takes you step by step through how to do this yourself. All right, so as I stated, there'll be a blog post that goes step by step to explain everything that I'm showing you today. So just so that you know how we got to our current point in our project, we set up our project by initializing TanStack Start. This is the command that you need to run to initialize TanStack Start. Also, all this is in the TanStack Start documentation, which I'll include a link to. So you run this command, and then when prompted, I chose React, TypeScript, set mode to no SSR, and I selected Tailwind so I can get Tailwind installed. Then you change into your app directory, and then I just ran install again. All right, so that gave us our starter project. And so now if we go back to our starter project, but remember, this is a mobile application too, so let's kind of scroll down and see the commands that were necessary to get Capacitor installed. So down here on the bottom, have a separate section, step 6, Capacitor integration. Turn your web app into a mobile app. You run the install D Capacitor CLI. To get the command line installed, you install the Capacitor core, which is a runtime. You do npx cap init. Remember, all this is in the root directory of your project. You specify the bundle ID for your project. And then you add the native platforms that you want. Since I just was focused on iOS in this project, so I installed both the Capacitor/Android and the Capacitor/iOS, which gives you the platform-specific core packages, but then I only did an npm cap add iOS. You can't add your iOS or your Android into after you build the app once. I just wanted to walk through so you can see the scripts that were needed to run to get this package converted to Capacitor. So then the other thing that you need to do is, so you need to make some modifications to your capacitor.config.ts. This information came over for us by default. This is a critical change that needs to be made. TanStack Start will, when you run a build, it generates the client, which is the front end, and it'll generate a back end. So there'll be two directories in your dist folder. There'll be a client directory and a server directory. Capacitor needs a web application, so you need to make sure this is pointing at client. All right, so if you follow all these steps, you should have Capacitor installed and set up inside of your existing TanStack Start project. It's set up to pick up the front end when it's built appropriately. And this is all you need to get Capacitor set up for where you need to be. So now let's pop back and take a look at the changes that we need to make to our TanStack Start project so that it is ready to build the backend the way we need it and the front end, which is the website that we packaged inside of Capacitor the way we need it. Okay, let's pop inside of the Vite config and highlight the changes that we're going to need to make inside of here. So the first one, as you can see down here, this whole SPA single page app block. Need to make sure that that is set up correctly. We want it enabled. The pre-render stuff was just there. Originally, I just left it, but this is new. So Capacitor requires a index.html file to be generated. So you need to make sure you set this inside of the pre-render block so that it outputs this HTML file. If you don't output that, when you try to deploy to a mobile device, you will see an error. All right. The next one is you see down here on the bottom, this build out directory. We want to make sure that we set the output directory to dist because that's where, as you just saw, Capacitor is going to be looking for its output inside the dist directory. The third change is this server block here. You need to set it up for cores because remember, when you're running the SPA that's generated or the website, it'll be running from the mobile device and you will get a cores error if you don't come in here and configure your cores properly. For now, just for testing purposes, I didn't set this up with the array of clients that will be making the API call. I just set origin to star, which means let anybody call it. But here you would want to maybe potentially specify, you can see already what it's trying to do inside of the array. You might want to say, because if you want to test and run it locally, you can still run the front end application. So that might be running from localhost. And then on here, you need to set Capacitor localhost potentially. And basically, whatever URL that you need to get through, you could set here inside of Origin. Instead of kind of going back and forth on this and making it kind of confusing with me hard coding a value in here, and then when you try to run it and follow my directions, it not work, I chose to just set this to the star and explain it to you here and also explain it to you in the documentation that you will need to configure this appropriately for you. This will work for demo purposes and it will work for you to get your mobile application running. So as I said, this makes sure that you don't get cores errors when your mobile application, which is obviously not running on the same HTTP address as your website, but tries to make API calls to the backend. Okay, so what other changes? Like I said, there's only a few. The other change you need to make here is inside of package.json. So a couple of things that I did was, I added this host onto, down here. I added this host onto the end and added this new script called serve backend. So the problem is that if you call serve, it's a preview and it's going to generate the front end site. We want the back end site generated because this is what our API will be making requests against. It'll be making requests against the default functions that will be applied in the back. So if we take a look inside of our routes, you can see we have our routes called demo names. And you can see quickly by looking at it, remember in the beginning when I did the demo and we made our HTTP request from our mobile app to the backend, you saw that it returned Alice, Bob, and Charlie. So this is our endpoint, API demo names. This is how you set up an API endpoint inside of TanStack Start. Like I said, this all will get generated by default when you run the command to create your first test app. But these API calls, along with any server functions you create, which we'll talk about later, will all be accessible from the back end of the application. So I can call, as I said, I can call this API demo names, which you saw already. Going back to our package.json, this serve backend call will generate the output that will provide me with the actual URL for where the backend is running. So for me to run this demo, I had to run a backend. Let me just briefly show you what it will look like. So you can see this is the backend that I had running for the purpose of the demo. And what's important is that you take this path here for where, not the path, actually, I guess, you take this path here from network because you're going to need this value to set in the environment file so that the mobile application knows where to look for its API endpoints. And so by adding this host option on the end of this dev, it will give you that value. And so as I said, there's no env file created when you first generate your app as TanStack Start. So here you can see I've created .env file. I've added my Vite server-based URL. This came from where I started the host, so now I'm going to use this parameter inside my application to know where the backend API is running. So if we take a look in the code, we had our two pages. We had the Start API page and the Start Server function. Let's look at the Start API page. You can see here inside the loader, I check if, using Capacitor, I check if I am running on the native platform. If I am, then use a URL from the environment variable so that I know to call the proper API endpoint. If I'm not, I can just use my default origin because that means we're running this whole thing on the same server. So this is how the API route knows where to make the appropriate API call to. And just a quick review for those who are not that familiar with TanStack Start and how the routes work. I'm assuming you are because otherwise this video would be kind of weird for you. But basically the way a route is created, you call create file route, you specify the path on how that route is accessed, you specify the component that's associated with it, and I'll go through that. The component's listed down here. Also, I have other videos on how this is all done, but just quickly cover it. And then you have this loader. This solution, because we're doing a client-side rendering, this loader is called on the client side. If we were doing SSR, a server-side rendering, this loader would get called on the server side, but it's being called on the client side. So then inside here is where we specify the path, because we are on mobile. We're going to call this API demo names. It's going to do the fetch. It's going to return the value. And then down here inside of our component, we could use this route. And then the static hook that's on it called use loader data. This will return all of the it will return the value from this fetch. I have all the names. And then down here, I just iterate through the names and they show on your page. Let's quickly take a look at the endpoint for the demo names once again. Also, see how they're doing the folder structure. These dots kind of get transferred into slashes. So if you look at this, where we are, this demo.start.api request. And then if you look and see how the route is named, demo/start/API request. And then also look at the API route, it's API/demo, which would be API.demo names. And then if we go here, as we discussed, just a simple API call that we're making to the backend. In a more complex scenario, this might be where you set up your database, you make database calls, return database calls, and get the values from the database calls and return them back to the client application. So we covered our start server page, how it's set up, our API page, how it's set up. We covered the API endpoint on how it's set up. So is there anything else that we need to cover to kind of show how this all magically works? Let's just do a quick run through kind of the build process. So I can show you how we got to our demo app. And then also I'll show you again why this demo.start server functions doesn't work. And so quickly, just to show you what that is here, if we go inside the code, you can see one thing that's also neat about TanStack Start, how everything is kind of like packaged together. So here they have this call called create server function. And so what it does is you specify that my method's a get, and then it has a handler. And on the handler, it executes an async function, and it returns the values. And so what this route does, we already discussed the way the route's set up with the slashes and the components and the loader, which is making the API call. What this route does is it calls a use loader data to get the to-dos. And then it takes the to-dos that it has, and then it comes out here and it loops through them and renders. But as you can see, the key difference is that it is using this create server function. Now the problem is that if you see here on this create server function, there's no way for me to specify a new host or a URL. These guys by default are expected to be called in an environment where the front end and the back end are all running on the same server. They are not running on the same server, so this will fail. And when I build this, I'm going to show you it. So let's hop to the build process. I already covered the build process. As I stated before, it's here in the documentation. As you can see, we've already started our backend, which is npm run serve backend. It's got the network, it's up and running, and we know that we're all good on our backend. We need to start our mobile application. So let's create a new terminal window. In our terminal window, let's do an npm run build. And you could see that it built the application for us. You could see it attempted to pre-render the front end pages. And this is the back end getting built. And if we, let's see, can I get in here? If we go into our dist directory, as I mentioned before, we have our client, which is our website that's going to get deployed onto our mobile device. And then here is the server. This is the back end. And so now the backend's up and running. Let's see if we could verify that. We've now just built everything, but let's go back to where the backend's running, and let's take this and come up here and enter this URL and then say API/demo names, I believe it was. And you can see that our backend's running because we got our demo names back. All right, so now our backend's up. We've just built the first step of our static website getting generated. And now the next part is you need to sync it to iOS, as I said. And so I'm going to say npx cap run iOS. It's generating all the native dependencies. It's copied over kind of the resource information from the static website that it needed. And then here where I picked the mobile device that I want to run it on, it's the same one. You'll see the application come and go. So now it's going to run Xcode build for me. If you want to, you could do an npx cap open iOS, and it will open up Xcode for you, and you can kind of run the build command from directly inside of Xcode. In this environment, I like to use the CLI. So now it's actually deploying app to this device. And so here we have the basic app. We have our home, and then we start a server request and we get our value. And so now let's talk about the server function. As I already mentioned to you, the server function doesn't work properly because you can't set the default URL. And so let's look at what the URLs look like for everyone. Let's open this up and let's open our developer window. As I showed earlier, when I refresh this page, you can see this route being called AP demo names. And if I look at the headers, I can see, let me make this bigger for y'all. You can see how the URL is properly structured to give us what we need. Now watch what happens when I call the server function. See, it crashed, but if we once again look at our network, where did it go? See this? This URL is just jacked up. This is never going to work. It's never going to get to where it needs to get because we can't set the base URL for this thing. And since we can't set the base URL, it's all messed up. Now there are issues already posted in TanStack Start's GitHub issues that talk about this problem. It has been sitting there for a while, but you're not going to configure your way around this from a capacitor perspective. It simply just doesn't work. And so, although it would be nice if you could use server functions at this point, I still think there's huge benefits, as I mentioned earlier, that you get from TanStack Start and the developer experience that you get from working in this environment that make it okay to just work with API routes and not use server functions at this point. Once again, you get all the benefits of TanStack Start to get your front end, your back end, all in one integrated environment. No having to figure out how to create this weird mono repo to get your front end app and your back end app working and sharing types across them and all that other stuff. You just get it by default here. You get the use of TanStack Router, which is a full type safe router, powerful React router for client side, full stack applications, fully type safe, first class search params for managing state, URL, and seamless integration React. TanStack Router is a win, huge win that you get out of the box. Also, when you're using TanStack Router and the loaders, you get a lot of the functionality that you get by default with TanStack Query. Hopefully, most people know what TanStack Query is. It's just an awesome way to manage your database query, managing the states, a whole bunch of cool functionality you get out of using TanStack Query. So, like I said, you get TanStack Start, TanStack Router, TanStack Query. Unfortunately, you can't create the server functions, but it's still a big win. I think that's where I'm going to wrap. I've covered most of the things that I wanted to cover in the video. This was really, as I've been starting to say, a virtual or a video README for the project because I will release the blog post that I showed you. I will release the full source code for the project, and the video will be here, all for you to use as a template to start building mobile applications using the TanStack Start framework and Capacitor. Hopefully you found this helpful. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share with your friends. Definitely leave comments below if there's more you'd like to see regarding TanStack Start, building capacitor applications, or just other interesting things you'd like to see me do videos about. Thanks, and I will get to you later. Bye.